So this is a very important session. I think everybody's talking a lot about AI, but the quantum computing tsunami is the hidden monster that's heading our way. And I think this is a kind of SWOT panel talking about opportunities and threats. So to lead this, to moderate this panel, we have Linda van den Brink from Travelers. And Linda, take it away and we'll get going. Thank you.
This is working? Good afternoon. I have the privilege of moderating the hardest panel of the day, not because we're talking about quantum mechanics, entanglement, bits, qubits, and other computer algorithms, but because I'm between you and your cocktails. So I appreciate that, but without further ado, I do want to introduce the two experts I have here today in the field of quantum computing. Today we're going to talk about quantum computing and what it can do for the insurance industry, how our organizations will be able to leverage quantum computing for operational benefits. And then two, we're going to get into a session and start to understand what our organizations need to do as insurance companies and what our insureds need to do in order to transition into a post-quantum era. Joining me today is Michele Mosca. He's a leading quantum safe cryptography expert. Among a long list of credentials and accomplishments, Michele is the co-founder of Evolution Q and Software Q, a Western mathematics professor. Waterloo, oh my goodness, I keep saying that. Waterloo professor, definitely Waterloo. And a founding member of the Waterloo Institute for Theoretical Physics. Michele is widely recognized for his abilities to help businesses, organizations, and academia prepare for a post-quantum era. Peter Tchaikovsky leads the quantum computing consulting team for financial services at IBM, helping banking and insurance organizations prepare for advancements in quantum technology. Previously, Peter advised financial services on strategic digital transformations as a management consultant. At BlackBerry, Peter led the software engineering and product management efforts on emerging technologies. Peter has a PhD in electrical and computer engineering from the University of Waterloo and an MBA from Wilfrid Laurier. Peter's going to take the stage and walk us through some PowerPoint slides. So we're going to start off the discussion is going to be some content. There's going to be some slides. It's going to be heavy. And then we're going to transition to the not-so-happy quantum, where Michele is going to walk us through some of the threats, which is going to be heavier, and after which we can talk and have discussion. So for the first little while, just sit back and enjoy the conversation. Peter.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the introduction. So let me just stand for a little bit. It's my great pleasure to be speaking to you about a very emerging, but what promises to be a very disruptive technology called quantum computing. And we're going to look at how it's going to be very relevant to the insurance industry in the future. I like the mention of a tsunami just a moment ago. Quantum is definitely coming. Everyone has a question of when exactly that is going to be the case, when it's actually going to be production ready. So I hope to be able to tackle some of these questions by giving you an overview of the state of the art of quantum today and in the near future. And again, how we think it's going to be very relevant to use cases that are going to make a difference within insurance. Okay? And certainly, as we saw in the keynote session at lunch, it really behooves us to be forward-looking, to be thinking about technological innovation. The risk landscape is obviously changing very rapidly. So we definitely do think that quantum can be a very useful tool in addressing that. Okay, so let's get started then. All right, so I realize that some of you may have perhaps read a little bit about quantum computing in the past, or perhaps at least heard of it. So I won't assume any specific knowledge. I'm going to be doing a very high-level kind of overview, but just to give you an appreciation of why we think it's going to be really disruptive. And and to give you a realistic projection, right, of what to expect. So first of all, we need to recognize that quantum is really the dawn of a new age of computing in many senses, right? It's really a different form of storing and manipulating information. And we haven't seen the likes of such a new technology for perhaps about a century now, right? So it is a very exciting time right now. And unlike the digital computers of several decades past, even though quantum is still an emerging state, we're already actually able to access these machines in the field today. So they have actually been already deployed, for example, to the IBM cloud, and they're accessible by anyone in the world today for experimental purposes, right? So we've already moved beyond just a theoretical exercise and are doing very real, useful experimental work. Now, of course, quantum computing is based upon principles of quantum physics, which are quite difficult to try and convey within just a few minutes. But certainly, again, it is a very different way of viewing the world and creating programs to address useful kind of problems. But certainly, quantum computing is very adept at being able to model various kinds of physical systems. But the really exciting thing is that it also has been proven to provide an advantage from a performance point of view in specific kinds of mathematical algorithms which abound within financial services and certainly are very relevant to actuarial science. And I'll be very specific about that in just a moment. Now, we should realize that quantum computing is really meant to be tackling intractable kind of problems, those that are really difficult to even attempt today. And these are problems that can very quickly exhaust classical resources when it comes to computational speed, memory, storage capacity, and so on. So these are problems that really are going to have a profound and worldwide impact, such as improved fertilizers, reducing CO2 emissions, more effective antibiotics, and so on. Now, of course, within the insurance space, we're interested in financial service kind of applications. So we do expect to be able to create more sophisticated mathematical models that closely replicate actual market conditions to a much greater degree than we're able to do so today, right? And again, there's lots of kind of risk simulations and other kinds of analysis that can certainly benefit from quantum computation, we expect. All right, so the question is, will quantum computing revolutionize the world to the extent that it's actually going to replace conventional computing? Well, the answer is probably not. We're actually going to be able to leverage both technologies into the near future, and certainly for quite some time, right? And in fact, for transaction kind of processing, we do expect conventional or what we call classical machines to continue to do the bulk of the work. However, quantum can step in and tackle certain mathematical problems which are very challenging today, right? So we have proven techniques for factoring and search and so on, and also to do some of the complex simulation work that I'll explain is again, very relevant to our space. So in fact, we can leverage both technologies at the same time in a hybrid kind of fashion in many examples. Now, to appreciate how quantum is different, again, this is going to be really high level, but if we just think about digital computers today, we have a single bit being able to represent a unit of information, right? So it's either a 0 or a 1 state. And of course, that's implemented using transistor logic. And we have a well-defined set of gates which allow us to create more complex circuits, right, in order to do useful work. Now, how quantum is actually different is that we have something called a qubit. And in the case of IBM, we have a superconducting qubit architecture. And we have essentially a ground state and an excited state, and then a sphere, which will allow us to actually represent the state anywhere along its surface. And this gives us much more flexibility. It allows us to contain a lot more state information on a quantum computer, right? And also to be able to manipulate that state information kind of all at the same time, if you will, within the quantum algorithm. So that's where a lot of the power comes from. And there's also a well-defined set of gates which are unique to the quantum world, which allow us to make observations and of course manipulate the state over time. So this is a probabilistic system, but we understand how to exploit these systems and get reliable results from them. So now let's look at a simple example of why state is important in a quantum system. So let's take a molecule that we all know and love and typically consume every single day, which is the caffeine molecule, right? So it's a fairly run-of-the-mill kind of medium-sized molecule. If we wanted to represent the entire energy configuration of it, including all of its spins and orbitals and so on, then we would actually need to construct a machine that ends up consuming about 10% of all of the atoms that we have at our disposal on our own, like, actual planet, right? So obviously it's wildly infeasible to construct such a machine in practice. However, the interesting thing is that we can actually get away with having a quantum computer that is able to actually represent the same information within just 160 logical qubits, right? Which is really, truly amazing. Now, we have near-term noisy systems today so that the qubits are still prone to noise effects, and the state, kind of degrades over time. But we have lots of great error mitigation strategies, some which have been pioneered even over the past year or so, which allows us to actually use even today's systems for very useful work. So this future that I'm depicting here is coming at us, very quickly. And in fact, we've made a recent breakthrough that has been featured in the very renowned Nature journal, whereby we were able to create a model of a system such that a classical brute force technique is simply unable to replicate. And this is really the first true evidence of utility, right, of actually having useful value from a quantum algorithm even on today's systems. Right, so I do want to convey the fact that these machines are real and they're already able to do something very, very compelling and useful for us right now. Now, there's a bit of an arms race going on between the classical and the quantum world, which is great. It actually benefits both sides, but quantum, because of the unique properties that it has, is bound to win out in the end. All right, so let me give you an idea of how frequently these systems are actually being used today. Well, actually very much so. In fact, IBM deployed the first quantum processor back in 2016, so quite some years ago, believe it or not. And of course, they've been growing in size over time. There's hundreds of thousands of users uploading and executing billions of circuits each and every single day. And there's voluminous work that's been published on the use of these systems. Now, what you see depicted here is the system 1, which is essentially taking the quantum computer out of the lab into a self-contained glass-enclosed unit. You see a fridge, essentially, which is supercooling the quantum processor inside to a temperature colder than outer space, so that it's removed from any kind of temperature and other kinds of effects. And it's essentially like a self-contained unit that can be deployed almost anywhere, right? So there's a bunch of control electronics in the back, of course, to manipulate the information through microwave pulses. But all in all, it's a case of really being able to take the machinery out of the lab into an actual enterprise kind of environment. Now, IBM has been working closely with leaders across all different kinds of industries, and certainly within the financial services space. So for example, Goldman Sachs has really been pushing the envelope of finding quantum advantage over classical by exploring the pricing of complex derivatives. HSBC has been doing a lot of work around asset portfolio optimization. JPMC has been exploring fraud detection, right? So there's numerous use case applications which are really undergoing serious study by leaders in the field. And they're also publishing their findings and sharing them and really helping the community as well. Now, I'm personally working with one of the leading P&C insurers right now in the US, who I can't name, but many of these projects begin really as stealth projects. It's quite the norm, in fact. And we're looking at making better underwriting decisions, right? So the insurance industry is also picking up on this. Okay, so these systems are actually growing very quickly in size. IBM does currently have the largest processor available now, and it's over 400 qubits large. And by year's end, we're going to have a processor that exceeds 1,100 qubits. And I'd like to actually show you a quick video now of System 2, which is our new architecture that's going to be supporting tens or even hundreds of thousands of qubits in the near future. And, and the first iteration of this is already being built in our IBM Research Center in New York State. So with that, let's look at the video.
Computing. Quantum System 2 isn't just a standalone system. It was designed to be extensible, supporting up to 4,158 qubits with additional control racks added. It was also designed to be modular, so multiple Quantum System 2s can connect cryostats with long-range couplers connecting the processors, supporting up to 8,316 qubits, and with 3 System 2s, a remarkable 16,632 qubits. In a data center environment, classical or AI racks can be swapped out to extend the computational capacity of the system. We will be unveiling our first working system at the Quantum Summit in late 2023. Thank you.
Great. So it's a new modular architecture, which we're very excited about. Now, it's still kind of filling the size of a room as we first encountered, I guess, with the early age digital computers. And I can't tell you precisely when they're going to become kind of like desktop size, but certainly this is a very exciting development. And so I do want to address the fact that we're not just looking at qubit counts, right? So that's a very easy to understand kind of measure, but there are other very important ones as well. So in terms of performance, certainly scale in terms of number of qubits is a factor in terms of the amount of information that we can encode within the system. But also, what comes into play is the fidelity of the circuit. So that's actually measured through something called quantum volume. So that's where the quality measure comes in. And then the final metric is speed, where we look at the end-to-end performance, the number of circuit layer operations that we can do per second. So essentially, we're looking at different aspects of performance, and what we want these systems to do is to have like truly relevant impact within an enterprise environment, right? We want these to actually be performing at their full potential and doing useful work. So in all cases, we've actually made a very exponential kind of progress. Here is the roadmap for IBM technology, at least. And we're actually already hitting the limits of how many qubits we can store on a single processor, right? There's only so many qubits that we can actually interface with and manipulate. So what we're starting to do is that we're starting to actually couple these chips together or even interlink them through classical, and then eventually they'll become quantum high-speed interconnects. And again, we're looking at building out these bigger modular kind of systems. But at the same time, we're doing a lot of work around the middleware, right? So we want the development of quantum circuits and the use of these algorithms to really be done in a frictionless kind of way. We want developers to not have to contend with orchestrating all of these jobs, right, and worrying about exactly how they're being executed, and fetching the information back from the quantum computer. Everything happens very seamlessly. We have a serverless kind of framework. We have something called a Qiskit runtime, which is kind of like a cloud service that's running and is automatically orchestrating everything and is containerizing the quantum circuits and performing the actual execution and fetching the results back. And finally, we have a lot of business domain experts working on models. So if you look at the top, we're creating application libraries so that we can actually enclose all of these various quantum algorithms in business logic, so that we're eventually going to be able to create APIs so that enterprise developers can more easily access these techniques, right? So the supercomputer of the future will consist of qubits, as well as bits and neurons in the case of AI applications. Basically, what's depicted here is a user or a developer being able to construct a Qiskit circuit using an open source development tool and be able to deploy that through a special runtime service. And furthermore, we have various circuit knitting tools, which essentially allows us to decompose the circuits into smaller pieces so that we can run them in parallel fashion on multiple processors. So that's a way of extracting maximum value from the present-day systems that we have right now. Again, everything happens in seamless fashion. So we've actually created System 1 deployments across the world. And in fact, even in very close to us in Bromont, Quebec, we've recently announced a new System 1 implementation in collaboration with the University of Sherbrooke and the local government. So we're very excited about that. And so we've set out a challenge that over the next year, we're going to be able to construct useful applications that utilize up to 100 qubits to a depth of 100. And this is really going to be a case where we can start to create truly useful business value generating applications, right? And we're looking for business domain experts within our respective industries to help us define what those are. And this is, again, using near-term systems before we see, the introduction of fully error-corrected machines sometime within the next decade. All right, so in the end, we're trying to bring useful quantum computing to the world. We're really working on not just necessarily accelerating current processes, but we're looking at ways to perhaps run tasks more cost efficiently, get more precise results, et cetera. There are kind of all kinds of different business drivers that we can actually tackle with the use of these machines. All right, and then the last part of my little presentation is going to be to discuss use cases, because I think that's where really the meat of this topic really lies, right? So across the board, across most core functions of insurance, we do expect that quantum will be able to deliver an advantage. So within the underwriting function, we do expect to be able to do risk segmentation to a finer degree. We do expect to be able to introduce more sophisticated pricing models as well that consider more constraints. We'd like to be able to perform risk analysis by performing more runs of scenarios, right, and be able to do loss reserving to a more precise degree as well for more efficient capital usage. So those are all areas that can benefit, for example, from quantum estimation techniques. And then for claims processing, for example, being able to detect fraudulent claims, right, more precisely. And given the volume of claims that a lot of businesses encounter, even marginal gains will certainly have great business benefit. Now, looking at reasons for why we expect these use cases to actually manifest themselves, if we look at quantum machine learning, we find that quantum can actually assist with some of the core tasks of AI algorithms, such as classification and regression tasks. It will help us to, for example, select data features more efficiently and also be able to allow us to train faster with data, right? So there are all kinds of benefits on top of which all kinds of different AI applications can be built, right? So I like to think of these as essentially fundamental building blocks or Lego blocks upon which lots of different hosts of applications will actually benefit from. On the simulation front, we expect to actually be able to replace classical Monte Carlo simulation work with quantum estimation techniques. And that's where we expect to see a quadratic performance advantage. So what I mean by that is if, let's say, your risk analysis scenario that you're computing in the cloud is currently taking up 9 hours overnight to complete, then for the same amount of precision, we expect to be able to actually compute and achieve the same result on a quantum computer within 3 hours. So we can actually do that during the day instead, perhaps, right? So that's already a powerful advantage. And then on the optimization side, we can construct objective functions and have more confidence in being able to achieve a near optimal result while considering a lot more constraints, which are classically difficult to compute. So again, at its core, like it's really helping drive a lot of different optimization applications that can be built on top. Now, to get just a little bit more specific, we have actually put together a portfolio of very many different use cases that are specific to this industry. And we've actually gone on to create actual detailed workflows which show you where the quantum computation actually fits in, and then we've made projections about what the scalability will look like over time. This is just a very sneak preview, but certainly within the risk classification realm, we do expect that underwriting will benefit from the use of quantum by being able to, for example, segment incoming prospective clients, whether they be commercial or individual context, more precisely into different risk pool categories, and thereby allowing us to deliver more tailored, let's say, policies, right, for those customers, as one example. And then, of course, this should help drive revenue and help us to improve the product mix, et cetera. Now, on the quantum optimization front, where we expect it to be very useful is within risk concentration analysis, so understanding risk segments to a much more granular degree, and then essentially allowing us to come up with more tailored kind of policies, right, that have the precise kind of mix of different riders, right, that address a particular risk posture and risk appetite and so on. So we, in the end, expect to be more effective in our marketing strategies, right, and provide more tailored kinds of products and services that will help differentiate. And then on the quantum estimation front, we see a lot of value in terms of catastrophic events simulation as well as mortality projection for life insurance purposes. So this is a case where an adverse weather event, such as a hurricane, can cause a lot of property damage, of course, but also subsequently have many downfall kind of consequences and, for example, result in business interruption, right? So being able to model all of these various downstream effects is something that a quantum computer should be able to cope with much better than we can do classically today. All right, so where are we going with this? In the end, what we really want organizations to do is to start to get ready for quantum, right? And what I mean by achieving quantum readiness is not only having awareness about these quantum technologies, but also having instilled within the organization an actual capability to work on these techniques, right? So understand at least the high-level basics of quantum and at least appreciate which quantum technique may be best fitting a particular use case, and then start to see how to parameterize a solution to tackle whatever problem there may be using that quantum technique. Now, we don't all have to become quantum scientists. That's not the goal here. But we can definitely take an existing, let's say, innovation team or an AI team and upskill them in quantum, typically within like a year or two, and have them already be effective at creating prototypes, right, that actually run on these quantum systems. And at the same time, we want the organization to understand how to construct an innovation pipeline to be able to work on these quantum concepts and eventually bring them into fruition by understanding what kind of investments need to be made from an infrastructure point of view, right, to be able to tap into these quantum computers. All right, so again, we're not turning everyone into physicists, but at a minimum, you know, we can certainly reasonably expect there to be a cross-functional team. Let's say, in the case of a quantum machine learning application, that includes a quantum architect that understands, you know, some of the business requirements of the solution, but also a data engineer that can construct a data pipeline for the machine learning application, and then a model developer that understands how to essentially take whatever quantum technique there is and be able to specify the correct data inputs, how to optimize it to some degree, et cetera. And then we have the algorithmic experts and world-renowned researchers already at IBM to help, you know, evolve these algorithms in the background. But that's not something that an organization typically has to worry about. All right, so in terms of how best to get started with quantum, we find that an accelerator kind of model is extremely effective in our experience, and we have actually many of these already deployed within the industry. And what this is really a program that is typically 1 or 2 years in duration that allows us to define a particular use case of interest and understand what quantum technique maps to it, and then develop it over time as a proof of concept that can actually run on one of these deployed quantum systems. So it's very real, it's tangible, it can be demonstrated through our user interface and gives you a preview of what a quantum solution is actually ultimately going to look like. And at the same time, we provide a roadmap for the organization to think about what strategic investments have to be made in order to make that use case a reality and take it into production, right? So we find such a program of performing like a structured effort around quantum is most effective. So why start the journey now? There are many reasons. Quantum talent is actually very scarce today. It's actually difficult enough for us at IBM to find, you know, top talent. But as I mentioned before, it's actually typically enough to take a set of motivated developers within your own organization and go through some of the educational materials that we have. And of course, we have at our disposal many different scientists that can help the team to pick up some early quantum skills and start to experiment, right? And actually, through the process of building out this prototype, to get an appreciation of how quantum kind of works, how to optimize it, whether it's actually looking to be useful. We can start comparing against the classical implementation as well, right? And really start the ball rolling. I've been speaking to many insurance leaders in a number of different countries, in fact. Most insurers actually are already aware of quantum, I will say, and a good portion of them already are including it as an innovation kind of target, right, for their long-term kind of innovation strategy. So if you're not thinking about quantum yet, now's the time to actually start thinking more concretely about it, and please talk to me, right? We can talk about use case possibilities and how best to get started according to the kind of culture and setup that you have within your own organization. And I will also say that this space is also ripe for protecting in terms of patenting ideas as well. It's very fertile territory already, we're finding. So now really is the time to get started. Okay, so with that, I'll just leave you with a depiction of our coffee table book, which is called The Quantum Decade. The next version is actually going to be published next month. I'd love to send you a copy of it, and it's going to include some detailed insurance use cases for you to read about. Okay, so with that, I think I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I will pause here and just see if anybody in the audience had any questions directly for Peter relating to quantum computing and some of the use cases that he put forward, especially as they relate to the insurance industry. Okay. If not, then what I think we will do now is, oh, there's a question. Great, thank you.
Yep. I'm just curious because I'd like to hear your comments on the availability of quantum computing as it relates to classical encryption and how that may pose a threat to data security and privacy for insurers.
Right, so I'll pause you there because that's a great segue. So with that, I will pass the mic to Michele, who will talk us through cybersecurity and the implications of quantum on our current encryption methods. Michele?
So great question.
Yeah.
And I always say, disruption is great for those doing the disrupting. It's not so great for those being disrupted. And I guess for insurance people, the notion of investing a little bit to reduce your uncertainty, reduce the variance, reduce your likelihood of being disrupted out of business is maybe a little more natural than some other industries. And why do we think it could be so disruptive, right? Because everybody says what they're doing is disruptive and it's novel and this and that, and it's a new paradigm. But why is quantum special? And I think Peter sketched out very nicely because there's a potential for exponential advantage, right? Where, as Feynman pointed out, just a few dozen quantum bits requires, and Peter gave a very modest example, you go a few more bits and all the matter in the known universe wouldn't be enough to simulate it. Okay, that doesn't mean it can do everything, but for certain niche, or I shouldn't say niche, some certain specialized problems, there could be astronomical advantage. And he, I think, gave a beautiful summary of all the different areas where people are exploring material quantum advantage. But why are we so confident it's there? Well, one of the reasons is just related to the question we were just asked, because for public key cryptography, which, most people are like, what is that and why should I care? But it's, and in the 90s, maybe you didn't need to care, but nowadays, virtually every digital platform we rely on, very fundamentally and systemically, we all rely on a small handful of the same digital platforms from a small handful of providers, cloud, payment systems, and so on, the internet, which is secured by a small handful of security protocols. And if you look at what they can do, it sounds impossible, but the magic that makes them work is cryptography, right? Which is like encryption, which is magical because it lets you send information through a public domain and people can look at it but not learn anything, right? We're used to encryption. There's digital signatures, can authenticate who you're talking to, authenticate that your ledgers weren't changed. It's probably bad for the insurance industry if people could change ledgers without detection. Or even if they couldn't, if you didn't know if they did. Just loss of confidence in very fundamental, digital functions would be catastrophic, right? Again, in an isolated incident, it's bad enough, but we're talking about digital master key, right? So systemic, hard to fix. So that's one of the, that's I think the main reason that really moved quantum computing from an area of academic interest in the early 90s to one of the most thriving areas of physics and computer science and engineering now. Because we saw very viscerally that this exponential power that theorists were talking about and about 5 people in the world cared about in the 80s and 90s could actually do something materially impactful. And back in the 90s, I was working in public key cryptography, trying to break it with regular computers, and I dismissed quantum computing as a joke initially, and then I realized, okay, maybe I'm wrong. But back then I thought it'd be so bad if these algorithms are broken. And Peter Shor, AT&T Bell Labs at the time, discovered that this hypothetical quantum computer would, crush the algorithms that underpin public key cryptography at the time. And we thought, this would be a big deal. And so what did we do? Well, we just doubled down again and again and again, dug a much bigger hole. Right now, virtually every critical infrastructure, depends fundamentally on these public key algorithms, directly or indirectly. So that's a really big problem to solve before we can reap all the benefits of happy quantum computing, right? But it does highlight, just to reemphasize Peter's points, this can be really disruptive. So you want to be on the positive receiving end of these disruptions, your sector, your economy, and so on. But when, right? When do we expect quantum computers? Do you have my deck?
Yeah.
No? Okay. No, this is IBM's, so it was a separate one. That's all right. So I've been asking this question since the 90s, and I've been asked this question since the 90s. And in 1996, I said, 0% chance of a meaningful quantum computer in 20 years, like a cryptographically relevant quantum computer in 20 years. And I was right. I said 20 qubits in 20 years. Then it'll be clearer. But the 20-year probability went from 0% to 1% to now it's over 80% for me. So who cares about 20 years? There's this graph here. So you can look at the reference, or you can email me, and I'm happy to send you all sorts of interesting reference material. I have my own estimates, but we asked 40 of the world's thought leaders, including friends at IBM, who really understand all the challenges of building a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, and asked them, all things considered, because, academics will say, I don't know. And that's a correct answer, useless, right? There's just so many, it depends on these 10 different things. Okay, bottom line, would you bet your kid's life on it? No. Okay. Would you bet, a chocolate bar on it?Maybe. Where in between are we talking in terms of the risk? Because then you could match your risk tolerance. And basically, most of them said less than 1%, but by most, I mean a little more than half. Not all of them. A lot of them said 1 to 5%, some even 5 to 30% in 5 years. So probably not, but certainly for anything critical, systemic, you can't accept the 5-year risk without some mitigation. I'm not suggesting reduce the risk to 0, that's too expensive, but at least let's tamp down the really scary tails. 10 years, 10 to 27%, okay? And so on. So material risk even in the short term. And you might say, what, 5 years? Call me in 4.5 years, right? We just saw the auto thing where, none of these attacks are technologically surprising. It took time to internalize the risk, let's say, and a bit of a market failure, perhaps, I don't know. But really, how soon do you need to act? It depends on 3 parameters. This is the fundamental equation of quantum risk management. One is, of course, well, not of course, probably the one that's in our control is how long will it take us to migrate our systems, our IT systems, our VPNs, our cars, and so on, to use cryptography that's resilient to these known quantum attacks. And talk to the car manufacturers. It takes years to migrate. If you want to be selling something in 5 years, you had to already have been starting, right? And then how many years is that going to be in the field? So for embedded systems, you're way too late. But other systems, unless it's some toy project you do in your basement, it generally takes 5 to 10 years minimum to do this responsibly. Okay? Look, it takes you 6 years to get through legal, and another, not 6 years, 6 months, in procurement. You won't be able to do this quickly. Okay? Even if it's simple. So if you're the server and the client with no regulation, no standards, you could do this kind of fast. How many people are in that category? Just about 0. Okay, so it's complicated. So migration time is long. Ask your friends in banks, how long did it take to go from SHA-1 to SHA-2, or from DES to AES? They'll know what these buzzwords are, and they'll just give you this horrified look, right? It takes a long time. So migration times, some number of years, where you're just stuck with these quantum vulnerable tools, again, with all the PII, all the trade secrets, all the really sensitive information you're handling, medical information. How long-lived is that information? Because you're supposed to provide, up until those last 10 years, so let's just say it takes 10 years, so 2033, you're supposed to provide security until when for those last few encryptions? Till 2043, right? Whatever. So it's Y plus X. Then when will the quantum threat be materialized? And I gave you some estimates on the previous chart. So you add those all together and you decide, how risky is it? When should I start? In most cases nowadays, it's some number of years ago where you should have started the migration path. Of course, you rank these risks. Some of them you just accept, or you pretend they aren't there. Some you self-insure. I realized several years ago that was actually a thing. And others you really need to do something about. So you can rank them and prioritize your actions, because you can't mitigate all these risks 100%. It's just not practical, so you do need some sort of prioritized way. Now, that just reminds me, people think the quantum is so complicated and confusing, and there's entanglement and superposition. Linda's tried with limited success to explain to me how insurance works, and there's so much entanglement and superposition in there. It's far more complicated than the quantum part of this challenge, I have to say. But this drives when you need to get ready. And it really depends. Within any organization, you have to go through all your different information assets, because they all have different X's, right? Different security shelf lives. They all have slightly different Y's, right? Probably similar Z's in terms of collapse time. And for each of those critical information assets, you have to do what? Well, a risk assessment, right? So what's the journey toward quantum readiness? We've done some work, and I'm happy to send you references with the Canadian Forum for Digital Infrastructure Resilience to develop quantum readiness, this is about cyber security readiness best practices. And the first few stages are all about preparing. So I think, really mimicking what Peter outlined, put somebody in charge. You need a team. Could be one person and you call them a team, but you need somebody whose job it is to have your quantum readiness plan in place. One person will not be enough, but you start with one person. Has to actually be part of their paid job, not what you let them do on the weekend, right? And they need broad executive support, because this is multi-department. So if they're just, under the CISO or under the innovation person, they can't succeed, because they're not going to have the conversations they need to have. So, and then they will guide you toward expanding that team. But one of the first things they'll need to do is a quantum risk assessment. Methodology is publicly available. You can align this with your favorite cyber risk management framework and then come up with a score for risk and start prioritizing. Again, this is internally you do this. You can get external help, so it can help you find, but ultimately you can't, what is the word? You can't outsource responsibility. You can certainly get help, but it has to be in collaboration with your internal team. I think I'll let Linda kind of guide us through some discussion, but clearly this is something that's needed both within the insurance sector in terms of how do you protect your own systems and industry, but also all the people you're insuring, all the organizations you're insuring. What's their quantum exposure, right? Because you're insuring them, so there's at least two big buckets where this impacts the insurance industry. I guess from a first things first perspective, makes sense to assess your own risk so you can kind of internalize what is this really, and then you can leverage those findings and help guide what you need to do with regards to the people you're insuring. But I'll stop there and see if what questions we want to focus on.
Before we actually get into the questions, I have one. Can you take us through what we think threat actors will do with the information? Can you walk us through the tactic of store now, decrypt later, and what that actually means and why it's relevant now and not just in 5, 10, and 15 years?
Yeah, so one of the most urgent action items is where there's a record now, decrypt later threat. So information you're uploading to your secure whatever, if it's being protected by TLS, which it probably is, if that's being recorded and state in our own governments are saying it's being recorded, not everywhere, not all the time, but that it is in general some of it is being recorded by state actors and maybe others. They store it, and people can point you to maps and Google Maps of where it's being stored, right, for future exploitation, right? When they do know how to decrypt it, then they decrypt it, and then they do what with it? Could just sell it on the dark web. It really, you can find the lists of different types of cyber actors and what their motivations are. Obviously, there's the state-led ones more toward massive geopolitical disruption and cyber war. Some people just want to make money. Some people just want to show off to their friends. And there's others, but there's a broad spectrum of motivations. But one of the most urgent action items is this long-lived information which you can't get back. You got to stop it. You got to prevent how it can be exploited by quantum computers in the future. As we get closer to quantum computers being real, then you can not only decrypt things, you can impersonate things. Then why would you trust a ledger anymore? If the anchor of trust was a digital signature, people lose confidence in those digital signatures. Auto updates, is it an auto update from Microsoft, Google, whatever, or is it malware? I don't know anymore, because the way we normally validate it is with digital signatures. So they can start, impersonating data, impersonating people, changing data, and so on. So there's a broad spectrum of potential cyber attacks that a broad range of this is a vulnerability, and normally we want to talk about what are they going to do, like ransomware, DDoS, stealing, cryptocurrencies. Those are criminal business activities that are achieved exploiting these vulnerabilities. This vulnerability is really a digital master key, so it's much more lethal than somebody clicking on a phishing attack, a phishing link, or exploiting a zero-day attack. Like the blast radius of those things is somewhat understood, but digital master key, the codes that pretty much everybody's using around the earth, it's not clear how you mitigate. So, part of the answer has to be another layer of defense in case these are broken, because you can't fix the one layer if it's systemically and broken. So we do need better methods.
And when do we anticipate this threat time happening? Like we've seen your roadmap.
Yeah.
When will quantum computers become cryptographically relevant, and how much after that? How much time do we have after that to start preparing for threat actors to get a hold of the quantum computers in order to,
Yeah. So again, we don't know for certainty, but if your risk tolerance is low, so if it's really low, like state actors have already mitigated this. They're not using public key cryptography.
Right.
They're not going to tell you what they're using. It's hard. It's not so scalable, and you don't have access to it anyway. But if you're not one of these few actors, the old school methods like a person with a briefcase exchanging cryptographic keys or delivering the messages works. It doesn't work very widely, and it's not cheap. But for critical systems, I think you really have to assume 5 years, or 10 years, depending on the degree of criticality. That's when they're going to be available. And I guess there's a fantasy amongst some people that, but only state actors will get access to those. I'm not worried about that, that's a very flawed reasoning. But even assuming that, in terms of you don't need to worry about state actors, because as we were discussing, there's not in many places, parts of the world, there's not a big distinction between state actors and criminal actors. But secondly, in today's world, I don't expect a big gap. I wouldn't assume a big gap between the first few quantum computers in bunkers, controlled by, for just very niche government or whatever intelligence purposes. The reason we're investing billions and billions of dollars all around the world to building quantum computers is because we want to do all the wonderful things, Peter was talking about, right, and more, and create all this great wealth for humanity. That's why we're investing in it. And, so it means it has to stay on the cloud. It has to be accessible, right, as soon as possible, because we don't want to lose, the end game, which is really economic prosperity here, right, which underpins our freedom and so on. We want to do that, so it means you have to make the solutions accessible. Of course, you're going to try to make sure only nice people have access to it, know your client, and so on. You're going to export control it like you do any other HPC, but they're still going to get in. And so I don't personally, I would assume a two-year gap or so, but a small gap between them existing versus being accessible to.
And you mentioned
actors.
Solutions, and I don't think we actually have talked about solutions yet. Can you walk us through the difference between quantum key distribution versus cryptographically algorithms, how that's going to apply? Are there more than one solution? What are organizations going to do after they go through the quantum risk assessment?
So the first things first, we have to fix the existing systems. What we're trying to do, what we are doing, is as close to a plug-in replacement for what we currently do, which historically have taken 10 plus years to deploy after the algorithms are ready. Getting the algorithms ready, 10 to 20 years. So we're getting close to having the algorithms ready in the next year or so. The National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States is the lead authority in this space for most of the world, and those standards will be ready. Of course, now they still have to be integrated into financial standards, and so on. There's other layers of standards and certifications and the long migration. This is often called post-quantum cryptography. It's absolutely necessary, and IBM actually has done a lot of the pioneering work in these selected algorithms, as well as others all around the world. It's truly a global effort. But of course, we have to have learned our lesson, what if this happens again, right? So in the 90s, we were triply lucky in that, first of all, we didn't depend that much on public key algorithms, right? We knew about the break by Peter Shor, and the quantum computers were decades. The threat was not immediate. So I actually think this quantum threat is really it's a blessing in disguise, an unprecedented, lucky, blessing in that it gave us a chance to address this market failure. It was real enough to motivate action, to fix the fact that, we bet our entire economy on these algorithms that could be broken without a plan B. I'm not saying nobody had a plan B, but most people most critical systems don't have a plan B. Again, some government systems, some niche financial systems are still doing some of the old school and symmetric key methods, but most of the economy is directly or indirectly susceptible to the public key cryptography being broken. So fix the first layer of defense, but now we need defense in depth here, because if this layer collapses for whatever reason, again, we're all using the same small handful of algorithms, we need something else to keep the lights on while we fix that layer. Okay? So that's where things like quantum cryptography, so quantum key distribution, actually co-invented in Montreal, Canada, and IBM in Yorktown Heights. Gilles Brassard from the Université de Montréal and Charlie Bennett from IBM Yorktown Heights invented it. They met in the late 70s. They published it in 1984. Beautiful solution to this key exchange problem, because, again, public key cryptography, one of the main ingredients is you can talk through the untrusted internet, but establish a shared secret, which you then use to encrypt. They said if you could have a quantum internet and talk with quantum particles, you can establish a shared secret, but that nobody can code break. You can prove that it can't be mathematically broken. Well, it's beautiful. In theory, how do we deploy it in practice? Well, 20 plus years of commercial deployments, we're getting pretty good at understanding how to deploy it scalably. And it's not the only alternative, but actually it is in some sense the most elegant and naturally scalable solution to the key exchange problem that doesn't depend on public key algorithms. So we've architected a way to make it interoperate with pre-shared keys and some of the old school methods in a simple and scalable way, so that as quantum technology advances, and this is easier than building a quantum computer, you can have more ubiquitously deployed quantum cryptography as an additional layer in addition to the current mathematical methods.
If there's no questions from the audience, I'm going to ask another one. Yeah, Joel. Can we get the mic, please?
Can we rely on the big companies, AWS, Microsoft, Apple, to lock these things down and have some safety from that?
To some extent, they're doing generally great work and showing leadership here, but it may have required a bit of a prompt. I mean, for example, like the end user, you can't just sit back complacently and expect other people to manage your risk for you. It's not how it works. Their job is to sell you stuff and get money for it. And the US government actually showed leadership by saying, we want our solutions to be quantum resistant in the not too distant future. All right, and that kick-started the NIST process, which produced these algorithms. Everyone else is kind of just riding those coattails in many ways and saying, great, we're going to use those algorithms too, but somebody had to show leadership there. That doesn't mean it's going to magically get on their product roadmaps, right? They really need customers to ask them. And so if you're interested, with the Canadian Forum for Digital Infrastructure Resilience, we have a 9-question questionnaire that you can discuss with your vendors, including the ones Joel just mentioned, right? So it doesn't cost money, but it's really signaling to your vendors what you need from them in a responsible way, okay? Because, there's what my one colleague in Germany called Schopenhauer's fourth phase. So Schopenhauer's, said that there's stages. There's three, truth goes through 3 stages. It's rejected, it's ridiculed, and then it's accepted as self-evident. And that's what's going to happen with this quantum threat business. The fourth phase, which my friend from the German government who's in charge, who's driving cybersecurity initiatives there, he said, and there's a fourth phase where the people who ridiculed you then say, why aren't you going faster? So everybody's going to get that, right? They're going to be like, hey, nobody's bought, like I've had vendors say, yeah, you're right logically, but my customers aren't asking, I'm okay. And then they call me a year later, 2 years later and saying, can we meet again? My customers just asked me, and what do I do? And some of them have called me up or just fed, they were upset because some of their customers are asking them to go way faster than they reasonably could. And I'm on their side because I'm thinking as a customer, you should have had that conversation sooner. So for everything where you're relying on cloud and apps you're getting from the big players, you're probably okay, but you need to talk to them. And if you do your own internal risk, but you don't just say, yeah, great question, Joel, I'm good. You really have to do your own internal analysis and see where is that not. So first of all, you have to actually have those conversations. And what else? Do we have any in-house systems that we developed and maintain ourselves? Do we have any smaller scale vendors we rely on who, when you ask them quantum, they just give you a deer in headlights look? What are you going to do about that? Third-party risk and so on. And then, are the people this is your own organization. What about everyone you're insuring? Are they doing all this? And this is where I really think, the insurance sector can, right now there's a bit of a downward spiral, which I think is a market failure. And I'd like, again, quantum is a blessing because it shines a light on some market failures where we've just kind of been lucky because they've been small or just hypothetical, but when they become real, then we might not be ready to deal with them. In that, a lot of companies, they're saying, yeah, we'll do something when our regulators force us to, right? the regulators are saying, well, we can't require them to use solutions that don't exist yet. So we're sitting back and waiting. The solution providers are like, yeah, call me when there's a customer willing to pay for this, and then I'll put it on my product roadmap. And you're sitting there just really slow motion, spiral into, a disaster. But what I've seen some leaders in government, for example, what are the baby steps, at least some steps in between do nothing and deploy production grade solutions that don't exist yet? It's start planning, right? So government procurement, certain government departments are, when they buy stuff, on their questionnaires, they'll say, do you have a quantum readiness plan? When do you expect your solutions to be using quantum safe cryptography? So it's not heavy-handed, but it starts sending signals. So I think regulators can do that, but I mean regulators in a broad sense. But I think insurance has a really fundamental positive role here, just like, because, just by staying in your lane and doing your job and just looking at who you're insuring and saying, like, are you using quantum safe cryptography, or are you going to be using it, by asking the right questions, just like MFA, multi-factor authentication now, has become table stakes if you want cyber insurance, so now everyone's using it because they want cyber insurance. I think insurance could be driving the adoption of wise quantum safe practices, right? And it'll be a win-win because losses will go down, so, I mean, it really will create value. Of course, step one in that, of course, is assess it for your own organization so you have a better understanding of how to deal with the people you're insuring.
And I just want to piggyback on that. I think that's the main point of this discussion is we have quantum. It's something that we can use for our organizations, as Peter discussed, and then we've got to look at it from two different vantage points. We've got to look at it from our own organizations and how we're going to get quantum ready, and then we're going to have to look at the underwriting piece. And the underwriting piece, to what you were saying, Michele, maybe it's just a question on a cyber application as to whether or not you've considered quantum. I think that is a good first step. MFA, the rollout of MFA actually went relatively quickly, in my view. We had loss ratios that were unsustainable in 2020, and as a result of that, the industry, most of them, required either an MFA exclusion or an MFA attestation. So our insurers had to have MFA, or else they would not be provided coverage, or coverage would not be affordable. So I have seen the industry react really quickly. But we talked about this before. Yeah. MFA is something that we had time to prepare for, whereas quantum is a little bit different. If we have our head in, if we're not paying attention, there will be a quantum supremacy. It'll get to the point where all of a sudden we're looking back and saying we're not ready for this. And it goes to that other question. We need to start building relationships with vendors that know and understand quantum computing. And that's, I think, a good conversation maybe to have, IBM and others, making sure we build those relationships with those vendors today so that when we get closer to the end of the roadmap, in your view, or threat timeline, we have support around us, because it's not going to be internal. It's going to be a combination of both, but it can't just be internal.
Yeah, and like the MFA thing, the problem crept up slowly, right? And when it started getting annoying enough, we started requiring MFA. The solution was there. It was really turning it on. This is much more complicated and longer to turn on. So that's one problem. So you really need to start ahead of time. Otherwise, there won't be a solution available ready to just switch on. And on the other side, like this is, and I've already said this, but this is, insurance doesn't like, I'm not an insurance expert, but correlated, losses. Like these are, and the losses won't like creep up gradually. It'll be kind of like, there's going to be the background and the usual fluctuations we're seeing all the time now with cyber-related directly or indirect losses. And then when threat actors have access to this kind of, attacking power, various kinds of losses will just jump up rapidly. But again, it's just in a very correlated fashion around the globe. So that's not an easy, that you really want to.
In insurance speak, it's called a CAT.
Yeah, right. You want to turn down those, correlation factors as much as you can by being proactive.
I'm just mindful of time. Questions from the audience? Okay. So I think I will ask one last question.
Yeah.
If you can leave the audience with something in 1 minute so that they can remember and take away. I think my question would be, how do you get this in front of the right people? How do you get in front of the executives? Is this something that we talk about with the board? How do we bring it up with the board? I think we have a little bit more time, but in 1 or 2 minutes, what should this audience take away?
I can speak to the quantum application side. So we typically like to start engaging at the CTO level early on because we find that that really helps drive the momentum behind a quantum initiative more effectively. And at the same time, I think it's really important to identify a quantum champion within your organization. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a quantum scientist, but someone that appreciates the potential of quantum and can really bring the message home, right? And then to find a really motivated team, and it can be a small team of innovation-minded people that are willing to experiment and see what comes of the effort. At the end of the day, I'm just going to say that insurance is very much a risk-based business. And for a modest investment right now in an accelerator or similar kind of program, you can start to really explore quantum and gain a step ahead of the competition. But there's a risk in actually doing nothing because we don't think that there's going to be an off-the-shelf kind of magical solution available anytime soon. You really have to do the work and create a capability in-house around quantum to truly understand it and to be able to leverage it. So, think about doing something soon.
Yeah, and the first phases of sort of quantum cyber readiness, just to distinguish it from the happy quantum readiness, is actually really similar. Get a team to start early planning, testing, understanding. The latter phases start to look different because you're really mitigating a risk and so on. But you do want to start that, I think, from a board level, leadership level. You want to manage the quantum cyber threat through technology lifecycle management versus crisis management. And that's why the proactive nature is really important. So yeah, get your quantum cyber readiness team. I guess the other thing I would add is you're not going to be first, which on the plus side, you're not alone. There's best practices we can share, even some thoughtful analyses of how this impacts the insurance sector even. But we can, we've been even evaluating some FI's quantum readiness plans. So there's tradecraft being developed in what a quantum cyber readiness program looks like. So you can get a lot of help in investing your limited resources wisely in getting ready for this. Another lesson I think we've seen in other sectors is if it's pre-competitive or non-competitive, you could also pool resources and do some of these elements together. There's other things you're going to have to do for your own organization. You're going to have to do quantum risk assess your own IT systems, but you'll probably find some elements that are like, hey, we could probably collaborate here and get further with less money faster. So anyway, happy to provide any resources that would be useful to you, including these various references I've alluded to throughout. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much.